Thank you very much. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Oh, now I get a rousing response. Thank you very much. So 15 tips, my top tips for image management success in Lightroom. How many of you have already gotten started with Lightroom and are feeling a little frustrated, like you don't know what the heck is going on and you lost track of your images and you can't find your images, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or maybe you're using a different piece of software and you want to know what you're in for when you make the switch to Lightroom. And that actually, to me, is the dream. Because so often I'm saying, here's the things that you shouldn't do, and then I'll get a few people who say, wait, now how do I go back and fix that? And so we're going to talk about some of the things that I would suggest that you sort of avoid or that you take into consideration right from the start. And we'll talk a little bit about how to fix some of those things that I consider so important. To me, Lightroom is a really powerful application, but you're still in the driver's seat. And so it's up to you to actually make sure that you're using Lightroom, what I would call properly, or best suited to your specific workflow. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are basically just strong opinions on my part. That's not to say that they're right. I mean, well, they're right for me. They might be right for you. They might not be right for you. And so I'll try to provide some context for why I feel the way I do, and I'll try to sort of underscore some of the counterpoints in many cases. But one thing that I think I would never compromise on is tip number one: slow down. Now, not forever, but when you're first getting started in Lightroom, I find that a lot of photographers make a big mistake. And I'm a fan of Lightroom. I use Lightroom to manage my own images, but I wish that it would not go out of its way to cause you trouble. And as soon as you install it and you launch Lightroom for the first time, it's trying to get you into trouble. Because the first thing it tells you is to click the import button to begin. And I recommend not doing that. Slow down, take a step back, and start to understand how Lightroom works. Do you understand the distinction between a catalog and your actual photos on your hard drive, for example? Do you know how to use Lightroom? How about you make a copy of some of your photos in a completely separate location, import those into a test catalog, and play until you feel comfortable working with Lightroom, until you feel that you actually understand what's happening. It can be a tremendous advantage. And usually when I find someone who's frustrated with Lightroom, it's because they dove right in, they imported all of their photos all at once, and they just started playing around. They thought they were working, but really they were just playing around because they didn't understand the application yet. And so, if at all possible, I suggest slowing down, taking a step back. I know you're in a hurry to review your images and you want to get everything organized, but to the extent possible. And I know many of you have already started working with Lightroom, and so you already have all of your images imported, etc. And so we're going to talk about some of the common mistakes that you might make and how we can work around some of those mistakes. So then, step number two. Consider different opinions and then ignore them. Now, part of the process, the sort of in-between step there, is essentially listen to other people. So I'm going to talk about some of my opinions in Lightroom, and I'm going to make reference to some other people's opinions in Lightroom. I won't call them by name. And then I'm going to tell you why I think I'm right. You might agree with me, and you might disagree with me. I'm perfectly comfortable either way, because ultimately I just hope that you can all get your images organized and optimized, and you can share your photos through Lightroom, etc. But one of the things that I find is that a lot of photographers will listen to many different voices. Now, different opinions are very valuable, very helpful, but what I find is that it creates a lot of confusion. One photographer suggests that you should set up your folder structure by date. I recommend very strongly against it. So now you don't know what to do. So you sort of have to pick the voice that resonates best with you, both in terms of teaching style as well as in terms of the logic of their workflow, the approach they take. It's not necessarily that one is right and one is wrong, it's just what's best suited for your specific workflow. So I would suggest keeping that in mind as we move forward through the rest of my tips. If you find that most of them are at complete odds with what you think is best for your workflow, then you might look more closely and make sure that I'm not right after all. And if you decide that I'm wrong, then I would suggest finding somebody else who can help you through a workflow that's going to make the most sense for you. So I don't claim to have all the right answers for everyone, just the right answers for me, and I hope that those right answers, or my approach and my discussion about the various things that I do, the decisions I've made, is helpful for you in terms of formulating those that workflow. But once you found someone who their style resonates with you and the workflow that they're taking makes sense to you, then I suggest that you, to the extent possible, just focus on that person and try to better understand a Lightroom-based workflow via that person. Even if it's not me, I'll be okay with that because I'd rather you not be confused. All right, so then delving into some of the things that I think are very, very important. First and foremost, consolidating storage. Now, you might assume that I'm just here to sell big hard drives. I'm going to switch my catalog here to a catalog that already contains some photos, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I have, in this case, 2 different hard drives that contain images. So you'll see I've got on my primary hard drive, I have an Austria folder and a Czech Republic folder and a variety of other things that we'll talk about to some extent a little bit later. I also have another external hard drive that contains some images. To me, it makes the most sense to have all of your pictures in one place. All of your pictures in one place. Now that might mean buying a very big, expensive hard drive, but to me it's worth it so that you have everything in one place. You're backing up from one master source, for example. And there's never a question. Where are the photos that I took in this location? They're on your Photos hard drive. You never have to think about which hard drive has a particular image on it. Remember back in the old days? When we would scan our slides and then we would store them on CDs and then onto DVDs. And then we'd have shelves upon shelves of DVDs. And we would have to have software to tell us which DVD to go get off the shelf when we needed a specific image. That was frustrating, wasn't it? The same thing can happen with hard drives. And in the context of Lightroom, it's not maybe as chaotic because all of your photos can still be within the Lightroom catalog. But now we've got 2 lists of folders. So for example, if you take a look over here in the folders section on the left panel, I've got my Macintosh hard drive where I've got a variety of folders, and then I have, in this case, just one other folder on a completely different hard drive. You can imagine as this library, as this catalog of images grows bigger and bigger and bigger, now I have one set of folders on the first hard drive and a completely different set of folders on the other hard drive, each of which is listed alphabetically, but separated. So you're going to try to, A through M goes on the first hard drive. Well, what happens when that drive gets full? Now you've got to move stuff. It becomes chaotic very, very quickly. And so I recommend that you have a single storage location for all of your images. That means that when your hard drive gets full, you have to buy an even bigger hard drive, and you have to copy everything from your old hard drive to your new hard drive. And there's a little bit of work involved and a little bit of time obviously involved, depending on how many images we're talking about. But so far technology has kept up, at least with me. I've got just shy of 4 terabytes of images. And someday I'll have to buy an even bigger hard drive, and hopefully they'll come out with even bigger hard drives in the meantime, where I can go into a device that essentially has multiple hard drives in one box so that to the computer it looks like a single hard drive. But again, to me, that's a fundamental of overall organization, is having all of your photos stored in one place. Of course, they're still going to be in folders, and that's where we come to the next little tidbit here, is that you might have made. Has anybody made a mess of their folders? Actually, let me ask that a different way. Has anyone not made a mess of their folders? Not yet. Just getting started. Right? So I actually have some examples here of folders that are maybe not named in the best way possible. So for example, visit to San Francisco. If I'm looking for a picture from San Francisco, am I ever going to scroll down to the V's looking for visit? No, I don't think so. And so I'd want to rename that folder, for example. Am I ever going to, look for Prague photos under Czech Republic? Maybe, maybe not. But before we get too far into the individual folders, tip 4, consolidate your catalogs. This tip could also be, if you've not yet gotten started in Lightroom, just use one catalog. One catalog for every image. Now, it's a little bit of a lie, but I sort of only use one catalog for all of my photos. One catalog for all of those 250,000 images that are in my Lightroom catalog, except There are situations where I create additional catalogs. Well, obviously when I'm teaching Lightroom, I'm going to make a dummy catalog for that purpose. But also when I'm traveling, I will have a separate catalog that only contains the images from that trip. But ultimately, my real catalog, you might say, my master catalog, is a single catalog that contains every single picture I've ever taken. They all have 5-star ratings also. You should try that sometime, actually. It's great for the self-esteem. Select all, 5 stars, it feels so good. But just one catalog, one master catalog that contains everything, and this sort of comes back to talking about a single storage location. In other words, that all of my photos are on a single hard drive. It makes sense that I would use a single Lightroom catalog. I've heard a lot of photographers have a lot of different reasons why they think they need multiple catalogs. I've generally disagreed with all of them. And it's not to say that there aren't reasons. One of the big reasons used to be performance. It used to be in the early days with Lightroom 1 and probably even Lightroom 2, I don't remember exactly when this shifted, but if you got over around 30,000 images, Lightroom was basically not usable. Now I have over 250,000 images in my Lightroom catalog and it works perfectly fine. So I don't think there's a real strong reason other than some sort of organizational reason that you might have, but I would think about that carefully. I hear from a lot of photographers, for example, who think that they're going to separate their business images, their commercial images, from their personal images, their vacation photos. Like they wouldn't sell one of their vacation photos if the opportunity arose. And so to me, the advantages of being able to have everything all in one place are outweighing everything else. The idea of having a smaller catalog or separating things out, there might be some reasons in your own workflow that make sense why you would want to have multiple catalogs. But to me, I would rather have a single catalog for everything. Remember, I can always filter my images in a wide variety of ways. Starting off with the folder structure, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But also, based on metadata, I can filter images based on star ratings, based on keywords, based on the lens focal length, based on the lens aperture, based on the shutter speed, based on all sorts of metadata. And sometimes it seems a little bit silly. Why would you ever want to filter images based on focal length? Easy. All of my best bird photographs were shot with probably a 500mm lens. Maybe a 4, maybe a 6, but probably 500. So if I filter based on focal length of 500mm, I've already gotten down to images that are likely going to be, among them anyway, my favorite bird photos. Or I'm looking for an image of a sunburst effect. Well, I probably captured it at f16, f22, something like that, stopping down the lens to get a sunburst effect. And so I might use other criteria as well. I'm trying to find a sunburst shot that I captured in Paris, so first I go to the Paris folder and then I filter based on aperture. But the point is that you might be surprised how often a lot of that information can be useful for locating your images. So when we have all of these filters available, we can filter based on folders, we can filter based on collections, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. We can filter based on metadata, both metadata that came with the pictures from the camera, as well as metadata that we added separately. With all that ability to filter, you're never needing to look at a huge number of images. I have 250,000 images in my catalog, but if I'm looking for a picture of a whale, I'm going to go to my Alaska folder, and that's taken it down already to only about 10,000 photos. And when I filter based on star rating, so I'm only looking at my pick images, my favorite images from that trip, I'm only looking at about 400 pictures. And then I could further filter by keyword, whale for example, and I've narrowed it down even further, and pretty quickly I'm down to a very manageable number of images. So I'm never looking at a huge number of photos in Lightroom. I hardly notice how many pictures there really are. So let's take a look at how that process works, because this is a process that I know a lot of photographers have struggled with. It's actually, in theory, a remarkably simple process. All I need to do is import from a different catalog into my master Lightroom catalog. The problem is that that process involves making sure that both catalogs, my master catalog and my other catalog, are available on the same computer, and that all of the photos are available. In other words, the location where my pictures are stored, my master storage location for all of my photos, needs to be available. That's pretty easy. But also the photos, for example, that I was traveling with need to be available. That's the only really difficult part, and in many cases it might not even be difficult. For example, when I'm traveling, I might have my Lightroom catalog and my photos on an external hard drive, or I can simply export as a catalog from Lightroom to another external hard drive, which will copy both the Lightroom catalog and all of my photos to that hard drive. Now I just need to connect that hard drive to my primary computer and I can import into my master catalog. So the only real trick is to have both catalogs and both sets of images available. Once that's the case, the import process is really simple. In other words, merging catalogs is very easy. I'll go up to the File menu. So right now I'm looking at what we claim to be my master catalog, and I want to import images from a different catalog. So I'll go to the File menu, and I want to import from another catalog. Right there. And that will bring up a dialog where I can navigate to the location where my other catalog exists. And in this case, I have right there a folder that contains this sample catalog. In this case, it's called my Iceland and Paris catalog. I'm going to select that catalog and click the Choose button. That will bring up a dialog essentially confirming what I want to import and how I want to treat those images. So you see that I have an Iceland folder as well as a Paris folder. So these were two folders essentially from one extended trip. And what do I want to do? Do I want to add the photos without moving them? Or do I want to copy the photos to a new location and import? Or do I just not want to import the new photos? So I'm going to copy the new photos. I get to choose which location. In this case, the location that I'm using to represent all of these photos is just a photos folder on my desktop. Normally this would be, of course, that big, huge hard drive that I talked about that has all of my images on it. So where do I want to copy these images to? You can see that I have checkboxes. I could disable the import of specific folders, for example, if for any reason I needed to. But in this case, I want everything to be imported. And so I'll go ahead. I can get a preview if I want. I'll go ahead and show the preview here. Just turn on that checkbox, and I can see which images are being imported. And sure enough, those are photos from Iceland and Paris. So I can just sort of validate that I'm importing the right set of photos. Theoretically, I could even just partially import some of these images. In other words, select specific photos to be imported. I'm just going to import everything, though. I'll let that process work here. So the information is being imported first. So all the details about my images first. So what sort of information is that? Well, it's all that EXIF metadata from the camera, for example, or any star ratings that I've assigned, or any keywords that I've assigned, etc. Previews will be generated for those images, and now you can see that sure enough, I have that Paris folder as well as that Iceland folder. And if you look closely, you'll see that there are some star ratings for some of those photos. And if we look over on the right side, you'll see that there are some keywords for those photos. So I have Eiffel Tower, France, and Paris, for example, as keywords. So all of that information that I added into my Lightroom catalog while I was on the go is now in my master catalog. How cool is that? So again, I use a single catalog generally, but there are times when I need to use or want to use a separate catalog sort of for temporary purposes, and then at some point I will consolidate those. Of course, you might already have existing catalogs. You've created maybe multiple catalogs containing images from different years or different concepts, commercial versus personal, for example. Whatever that system might be, if you want to merge all of those into a single catalog, the process is basically what I've just shown you. You just need to take the extra step of staying organized, deciding which of your various catalogs should be considered the master catalog, and then importing all of the other catalogs, making sure to only import each catalog once, for example, but import each of those other catalogs one by one into your master catalog, and now you have everything in one place. And again, that means that now we have one catalog in Lightroom managing all of our photos and one hard drive that contains all of our photos. To me, the advantages of that are pretty significant in terms of just my workflow efficiency. I always know that I have access to everything at any given moment. So we return back to folders. Clean up your folders. So we've got a single location, ideally, that's going to have all of our photos in it. And we need to rename those folders. We'll talk a little bit about the naming. The first problem I need to solve, though, is this issue of having folders on 2 different hard drives, or having images on 2 different hard drives. So we'll do that as part of our folder cleanup work here. And this is actually where we run into a little bit of a challenge with Lightroom, because generally I'm not going to have a subfolder containing all of my subfolders on my hard drive that contains my images. I'm just going to have my hard drive and then folders for each photo shoot or trip or wedding or whatever it might be, whatever type of photography you might pursue. The problem is that I can't take this folder. So down below you see I have the Central Park Flowers folder. I can drag it and put it inside a different folder. But I don't want it inside a different folder. I want to put it at the root level of that hard drive, but Lightroom doesn't like it when I do that. So how am I going to accomplish this? Well, in theory, I could make a new folder. So for example, you might not be aware, you can click this little plus symbol over to the right of the folder's header, and when you click there, you'll get a pop-up menu, and I can choose to add a folder, for example, on the currently active drive. So I could add, in this case it's Central Park Flowers, I could add a folder called Central Park Flowers, and then I could drag and drop the images from that other location into the new empty folder, and then I can go back and delete the folder, and that seems like a whole lot of trouble. It can be done, but to me it's a little bit messy, and I'm then moving images. There's just all sorts of potential challenges there. So I don't like that approach. I would like it if Adobe would just add the ability to drag to the root folder. That would be very nice. If anybody has a friend at Adobe who can fix that for me, that would be wonderful. And another option, something I usually don't recommend, but Lightroom made me do it, because Lightroom doesn't have the ability that I really want. So another option is for me to do it manually. This is dangerous. Dangerous. To mess with your photos or your folders outside of the context of Lightroom is one of the worst things you could possibly do, but we're going to do it right now. And the reason it's one of the worst things that you could possibly do is that you're liable to confuse Lightroom. Let's confuse Lightroom. Normally I would copy photos and then maybe delete the originals after they've copied successfully. I'm going to live dangerously for now, mostly just so we can skip a step just for efficiency. And so I'm going to drag and drop, but I'm going to use the option to move the folder. So I'm taking a folder from my, we'll just call it hard drive number 2, and then moving it to hard drive number 1. So we're kind of cleaning up that mess inside of Lightroom, except we didn't tell Lightroom about it. Lightroom's going to get angry. I'm used to making people angry though, so it's okay. So we'll go ahead and move that folder. In just a moment here, you'll see it disappears from my More Photos folder. And we'll get back into Lightroom. And oh, look, it looks like that folder is still there. Well, let's go take a look at those pictures. Oh, wait just a minute. You might not be able to tell on the display here, but we have these little exclamation points up at the top right of each thumbnail. You can see them down here on the film strip as well. And if you look really closely on the folder name, you'll also see that the folder itself has a little question mark icon. If I were to try to open one of these images in the develop module, or really just switch to the develop module so that I could work on one of these images, then we'll get this message you can see up at the top: the file could not be found. Well, that's unpleasant, but it's my own fault because I didn't tell Lightroom about this. But Lightroom made me do it by not having the feature I want, so I'm always going to blame Lightroom. So how am I going to fix this? Actually very simple, but you can probably appreciate how you can get into hot water here if you don't reconnect missing folders in the right way. So I'm going to right-click on the folder that Lightroom indicates is missing. In theory, I could work with each individual image, but I'd rather just take care of the folder all at once. So after right-clicking on that missing folder, I can just choose Find Missing Folder from that pop-up menu, and then I'll navigate to the location where that folder exists. In this case, it is the Central Park Flowers folder. So I'll just click that folder, select that folder, and then click the Choose button, and Lightroom kind of readjusts itself, and now we can see here's Central Park Flowers now in the new location, the first hard drive you might say, along with all of my other photos. So is that the better approach? I don't know. The better approach is for Adobe to just give me the feature that I want, and maybe in the next version we'll have that finally. You could create that folder as I mentioned before, but to me, lacking that ability to just drag to the root level, I'd rather just move the folder, hopefully it's not too many folders, outside of the context of Lightroom, and then just clean it up within Lightroom. But speaking of cleaning up, let's go ahead and clean up some of those folder names. We don't have to fix all of these folder names. We can just kind of illustrate the concept. But for example, I made reference to that Visit to San Francisco folder. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I'll right-click and choose the Rename option. And I'll just get rid of the Visit To part. So it's just San Francisco, December 2010. That's all well and good. Having the date information in the folder is useful, perhaps. But what happens when you've gone to San Francisco multiple times and you have multiple San Francisco folders? December is at the end of the year. January is at the beginning of the year. But alphabetically, December comes before January. So you can get all sorts of confusion happening if you're using the names of the months. And so instead, what I do is first off start with the year, 2010 in this case, dash, and then the 2-digit number for the month, including a leading 0 for all the way through September. Well, why am I using this naming structure in the first place? Why not just call it 2010-12? Or why not have a 2010 folder and then have a 1 folder for January and 2 for February, etc.? Because I said so. I don't really care how you structure your folder names. I mean, I do, but I don't. I care that they're organized, but I don't care what system you find is best for organizing your images. What I will say is that I don't think that a date folder system works. Now, partly I'm just speaking from my own experience, because I can't remember, I don't even know what today is, let alone when was the last time I was in Spain, or when was the last time I was in New York City. Oh wait, I'm there now. I lose track of time all the time. I don't know what day of the week it is, etc. So to try and think, oh, where's that whale photo that you talked about? Well, let's see. What year would that be? It's not this year. I don't think it was last year. It was probably at least, well, no, I was living in Seattle at the time, so it had to be at least a few years ago. You see the trouble. How many of you organize by date? You got a year folder and a month folder. Which folder will you find a whale in?
The folder that has something keyworded whale.
The folder that's keyworded whale. That's cheating. Because now you search for whale and you find your folder. So you can do it the other direction. To me, what makes the most sense is that the first thing you think of when you think about those images is the beginning of the name of the folder. I don't want to have to try and remember what year it was if I just want to browse through my images. And so to me personally, the location is usually key for me. That's just me. But the date, I don't even remember. Half the time I couldn't even tell you. And so this gives me a faster way to get to my images. Yes, you can search with a text search that includes the folder name, so you can do essentially a metadata search and look for words that exist within the folder name. Hopefully someday in Lightroom, hint, hint, Adobe if you're listening, there will be an ability to start typing some text and filter the list of folders over on the left panel in the library module, just like we can start typing for the keyword list over on the right panel in the library module so that we can filter that list of folders. That would be much better. So for me personally, when I think about a folder name, it's how am I going to think about those pictures? When someone says, here's a subject, where did you photograph it? Crop duster, that's Palouse. Whale, that's Alaska. Bird, that's Florida. You know, whatever the case may be. Maybe you're looking for something specific, but that's how I think about my pictures. You might think about your pictures differently. Any wedding photographers here? I am always so envious of wedding photographers. They have it so easy. I mean, don't tell them I said that, but they have it so easy, at least in terms of that folder structure, because it's just simply the name of the couple. That's pretty simple. Or if you're an advertising photographer, it's probably just the name of the company that hired you to photograph that product or whatever the case might be. And so in some cases it's going to be a little bit easier, in some cases not so difficult. I recommend against a date structure unless, how many of you think that you can always find photos just based on the folder, not with any keywords, but just year and month? Anybody? I usually have at least one. Yes? Are you an engineer? Sort of. Okay, that counts. 98% of the time, the people who say that they can use a purely date-driven folder structure and always find their images, they're always engineers. So granted, for some people it will work. I just think for many of us, especially me, it doesn't work. But again, I'm not concerned about what structure you're using. I just want you to be thoughtful about that structure so that you can actually find your images later. For me, that happens to be usually location. Sometimes it's subject-driven. So for example, flowers in Central Park, to me, I always think of that as Central Park flower. Well, I guess that's still location driven, isn't it? But if, if it was just the daffodils out in front of my house or something, it might be daffodils, and that's sort of more subject driven than location driven. Then I had somebody ask me, well, I'm a street photographer in New York City. Maybe dates are okay after all, because if you're just going out every day, it's not like you're going to remember based on which neighborhood you were in or what street you were on or something like that. So there are certainly situations where having a system based on this subject name can be a little bit tricky. But give it some thought and try to develop a system that works really well for you in terms of being able to find the folder, because in most cases I find that folder is sort of your first line of defense in terms of being able to look for your images. I'm looking for a whale photo. In theory, I might go based on keyword whale, but if I'm looking for a specific whale photo, and I happen to know it was on my trip to Alaska, I'm going to start at Alaska. So it's not always the case that the folder is the first place you go, but for me, most of the time it is, and so I want a folder structure that makes sense for me personally. So figure out what that's going to be for you, and then if, hypothetically speaking, I'm not trying to insinuate anything for any of you, except you already all raised your hands admitting that your folders are a little bit of a mess, but then go back. Once you've sort of thought about a system that works for you, a structure that works for you, then go back to your older folders and get those cleaned up. I realize for many of us that could be a daunting task. So just over the course of time, just kind of scroll through your folders every now and then, do a little bit of work at a time, and gradually your folder structure will start to make a lot more sense. So there are some others in here, obviously. This Czech Republic trip, I'm never going to think about that as my Czech Republic trip. That's Prague to me. And so I'll go ahead and right-click and rename, and we'll just change this to Prague. And then 2009-10 since it was October. So we'll leave it at that in terms of the folder names, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good sense. Obviously, some of these other folders could still use to be cleaned up. I also, have a subfolder here. So I was at Maine Media Workshops teaching a workshop, and during the workshop, we went to the Lobster Festival and photographed some things at the Lobster Festival, and I have a subfolder for that little subset of the trip, except half the time I'm not even going to realize that I have that subfolder unless I've expanded the list. And so for me personally, my preference is to have all of the images from one trip in one folder. It's not always entirely true. We saw the example of the Iceland-Paris thing. Really, that was one trip, but in my mind, it's sort of two trips, two destinations, so there's two folders for that. With this situation, this Maine Media Workshops trip with the Lobster Festival kind of added on, that's really just one trip to me. And so I'll go into that subfolder, select all of the images, and then just drag and drop to the other location here. So taking them from a subfolder and moving them up to that parent folder, you'll see that I get a little indication, a little bit of a warning here that I am moving the photos on the disk. I'll go ahead and accept that, and you can see now that the Lobster Festival folder is empty, and that workshop folder contains the images that had been in the subfolder. And so at this point, I can just right-click and remove the folder that no longer contains any images. So obviously I have a little bit more work to do here in terms of cleaning up that folder structure, but more importantly is that you go home tonight and clean up all of your folders. Leverage the import. So I hear a lot of sort of differing opinions on the import process. I hear from a lot of photographers who copy the images off of their compact flash cards to their hard drive, then import into Lightroom. Then they might go through the images and filter some of them, delete some of them, do whatever they're going to do with them, and possibly then rename the images. My feeling is that it's better from a workflow efficiency standpoint to do all of that at once, to leverage all of the capabilities of the import feature in Lightroom. And there's a lot of stuff happening there. Admittedly, importing into Lightroom, copying your photos as part of your import process is actually slower than copying the photos to your hard drive and then importing them into Lightroom. I know it shouldn't be that way. I'm not sure if anybody knows why it's that way. I'm sure if Adobe knew what was going on there, they would fix the software to make it faster. But there is some overhead involved with the import process, and so importing your images into Lightroom as part of the process of copying them, that's slower than doing the copy first. I'm okay with that. I'm a very patient person. Not really. But I'm more interested in workflow efficiency because generally speaking, I'm not sitting around the computer waiting for the import process to finish. I start it and then I walk away. I go swap batteries in my camera, plug the battery charger into the wall, and make a sandwich, whatever stuff I need to do. Then I'll switch to the next card if I filled up multiple cards on a given photo shoot that day or whatever the case may be. So let's take a look at that import process, and I just want to give you a sense of the benefits essentially of all the options that are available. So out on the desktop rather, I have a folder that represents a compact flash card because I already have too many things plugged in up here and didn't want to plug in a card reader as well. So I have a folder pretending to be a compact flash card essentially. Oh, those Alaska pictures we were talking about. So we're going to import these images. Normally, I don't even have to select a source because Lightroom's pretty smart about this. When I tell Lightroom by clicking the import button at the bottom of the left panel that I want to import images into my catalog, it's smart enough to basically examine my computer. And it can see that I have a removable drive, the card reader for my compact flash card, that contains images. And so it'll set that to the source automatically. I should also hasten to point out, up here toward the top left, you can see this include subfolders checkbox. That would actually not say include subfolders because we're working with removable media. It would actually offer the option to eject the media when that process is finished. Yet more efficiency. You don't have to eject the card sort of manually or risk getting yelled at by your computer because you didn't eject the card in the proper way. So normally that checkbox there would indicate that the card can be ejected automatically, and I personally prefer to take advantage of that so that once I see the on-screen message that the card was ejected, I can unplug it, I can put it back in my camera and reformat it, I can put the other card, the next card into the reader, whatever I need to do. Turning our attention to the top center, you'll see that we right now have the option set to add images. In this case, conceptually, I want to move the images from my compact flash card onto my hard drive, right? Conceptually. In reality, I'm paranoid that something is going to go wrong during this process, and so I'm going to use the copy option. You might also notice to the left of copy, we have the option to copy as DNG. DNG is Adobe's digital negative file format. There are a couple of key advantages to converting your raw captures to DNG. DNG, you can essentially think of it as a container for your raw capture, if you will. The two primary advantages is that the DNG file will be somewhere in the general vicinity of 20% smaller than your original raw capture with no loss of information. It's just storing the information more efficiently. It's not lossy. So it's not like JPEG compression where image quality is going to suffer. It's just file compression, which makes it more efficient. So the file size will be rough. It'll vary based on your specific raw file format, but roughly 20% smaller file size. That's pretty cool. The other benefit, or at least possible benefit, depending on how you look at it, is that the metadata, all of the metadata about your photos can be stored inside that DNG file, so you don't need to have that XMP sidecar file for your raw captures. To me, number one, that's not necessarily a really good benefit because of the backup approach that I use. That actually means that anytime I add a keyword, now my backup has to re-back up the entire DNG file, not just the little sidecar file. And frankly, I'm not that worried about having the XMP sidecar files floating around on my hard drive because I'm never really looking there. Lightroom doesn't show me the XMP sidecar files, so, out of sight, out of mind, I suppose. The main reason that I don't use DNG is that there is no way I'm just going to delete my original raw captures. So why do I need to create yet another file that I've got to keep track of? So I just use the copy option, but just so that you're aware of the other option that exists. I'll then specify my location In other words, where am I going to put these images? Well, I'm just going to specify the top level location. So in theory, this would be my external hard drive. For our purposes, just for demonstration purposes today, that's a Photos folder on my desktop. I'm just specifying the primary location. I'll talk about why I have to do this, I don't have to, but why I'm doing this location thing, this destination in 2 steps shortly. Build previews. Well, Lightroom is using previews to speed up the process of me being able to look at my images. You can see here that I'm looking at thumbnails right now, for example. Later, I might be looking at larger images. I might even zoom in 1-to-1 perhaps to get a really close look and make sure the image is sharp, even though I know every picture I took was sharp. Hypothetically speaking. So which previews do we want to render during this import process or as part of this overall import process? The minimal or embedded in sidecar, that's just going to take the smallest preview or the preview that's embedded into your raw capture and use that within Lightroom. The problem with using that option, it's much faster at import because you don't have to wait for those previews to be built, they just have to be extracted. But that also means that browsing your photos, you're probably going to have to wait as you navigate from one image to the next for the standard preview to be built. The one-to-one preview, I would say, is generally not necessary for most photographers. Because generally, if you're like me, you're not going to zoom in on too many of your images. I take a lot of pictures. I assume they're all going to be sharp. So what do I need to zoom in for? But the reality is I don't need to evaluate really closely every image. First, I go through and find which ones I like. And then the one I think I like, I might zoom in on to make sure it's sharp or there's not a lot of dust or noise or whatever the case may be. So I don't generally need to zoom in on too many photos. As a result, I don't feel that I need to generate those big previews, the one-to-one previews, the full-size previews for every single photo. So I just use that standard option. And by doing that now, as part of this import process, when I browse among my photos, it's going to be seamless. I'll just be able to navigate from one photo to the next. Build smart previews. Yet another cool option. This enables part of our workflow when it comes to sharing images via Lightroom Mobile, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It also makes it possible for you to work in an almost unlimited way with your photos, even when your photos are not currently available. So let's assume that you keep your catalog on your laptop and you keep your photos on an external hard drive and you got to go somewhere without your external hard drive. If you had generated these previews, these smart previews for all of your photos, you can still work with your images in the develop module. You can still share your images directly to Facebook or send them via email or export them. You can perform all sorts of tasks with the images using those smart previews. So it might be worthwhile depending on your specific needs and whether or not you're going to work with the images when they're not actually available. Those smart previews do consume a fair amount of hard drive space though, so I wouldn't generate them unless you actually need them. For our purposes, I just won't generate them in the interest of saving a little bit of time here. Don't import suspected duplicates, so Lightroom can automatically check for duplicates within the catalog and make sure you're not importing them. Now, I want to make sure that everybody understands very clearly right up front that I'm speaking hypothetically here, and this is not a mistake that I've ever made myself. But hypothetically speaking, let's say, for example, I fill up a compact flash card about halfway, I download those images into my Lightroom catalog, and then I put that card back into my camera and forget to reformat it and start taking pictures again. Now when I go to import those images, thinking that I'm only importing the new photos, I'm actually going to be importing the old ones plus the new ones. Fortunately, Lightroom's going to save me from my hypothetical mistake, and it will ignore the duplicates essentially. And it'll actually show me those images, they'll just be dimmed. They'll essentially be black. I'll turn off a checkbox here so you can see a dimmed image. It would actually be dimmed even darker than that, and the photo would not be imported. I think one of the worst things you could possibly do is have duplicates of photos randomly within Lightroom. It'll drive you crazy. And so that's, I think, one of the best features. It's sort of the unsung hero of the import process here. Speaking of heroes, backing up. I can back up as part of the import process. So I'll make a second copy too, and I can specify where I want to put that backup copy. In this case, I'm just going to make a folder on the desktop pretending to be a second external hard drive. Normally, I would either be traveling, for example, with 2 external hard drives, or I would be downloading the images to my internal hard drive and making the backup copy on the external hard drive. But now, as part of this import process, I'm making 2 copies of my photos for a grand total of 3 copies of my photos. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Renaming. I can rename even. This is pretty cool. What's the main reason we want to rename our photos? Mostly being annoyed that our camera is giving us a useless file name.
When you reformat, you get the same file name.
Depending on your camera and how you structure your file naming, you might reset. Some cameras actually provide us with an 8-digit number. That's pretty handy. Most cameras still give us a 4-digit number, so it'll be something like IMG_1234, which means we've got 4 digits, which means after 9,999 captures, you're back to image number 1. Or if you reset, so for example, when I capture a time lapse, I manually reset the numbering back to number 1 so that the time lapse starts with number 1. There are all sorts of situations where the naming can be a little bit of a hassle, but also if you share your photos with anyone, would you rather send a photo to someone that's called, sending several photos that have a name structure like IMG_1234, or Tim is a really great photographer and you should totally hire him for your next event, -1234. Which do you like better? So even just, if it's a wedding, the last name of the couple, or, if it's an advertising shoot, the name of the company that hired you, whatever the case may be, it just makes a little bit more sense. So in this case, for example, we'll say, I'll just use this custom name plus sequence number preset for the renaming. We'll just call these Alaska, and I'll start the sequencing, of course, with image number 1. So I can rename right from the start. The only maybe strong reason that I might have for not wanting to rename now, even though it's much more efficient, I would say, in terms of workflow, is that if you're going to delete images, you might want to wait till after you've deleted the outtakes to rename your images, just so there's not a gap in the numbering. Maybe that's a little too, being too particular. But if you have a gap in the numbering, then you're always worried that maybe one of those shouldn't be gone. I don't actually tend to delete photos anyway, so for me it's not a big issue, but something to think about in any event. Scrolling down on the right panel, this Apply During Import section, Develop Settings. I can change every single image to, for example, a black and white interpretation of the original in a completely non-destructive way. I never do this, but it seems kind of cool for those who like it. Anybody apply a develop preset during import? Nobody? I don't either. But there are certainly photographers, if you specialize in black and white photography, to choose a preset that gives you a good starting point for a black and white interpretation of your color image. Not a bad place to start. So something else that we can do, I don't find too many photographers who take advantage of that option, but something to be aware of, and yet another potential add-on in terms of that workflow efficiency. Metadata. I can add additional information to every single picture that I'm importing. So for example, every picture upon import can be given a 5-star rating. Okay, maybe that's not a good idea. But what information might I want to add to every single picture? Well, assuming it's just me that's taking pictures that are being imported into this Lightroom catalog, at the very least I could add my copyright information, I can add my contact information so that nobody will ever steal my pictures and people know how to contact me if they want to give me money for my pictures. Again, hypothetically speaking. So let's go take a look at the presets here, and I'll just choose that Tim Gray preset. So I've just chosen Edit Presets from that metadata pop-up, and now you can see what information I have added to this preset. So we have copyright with my name, and the status is set to copyrighted, and the copyright info URL is just my website address, and my email address there, and my website once again, etc. So just basic contact information. You could put your address in there if you want people that find your pictures to be able to stop by to offer coffee or something like that. I don't really recommend that one. We could, in theory, add, literally, it was a joke, sort of, but you could add a 5-star rating to this template. I don't recommend it, but there are scenarios where maybe you want every image to start with a 1-star rating, you'll move from there, etc. So it's not totally out of the question, but generally, I would keep this very generic, just your contact, copyright information, that type of thing. I'll go ahead and close that dialog. And then we get down to keywords. Like metadata, we need to be careful here that we're not being too broad in our keywords. So what sorts of keywords might come to mind with this set of photos? Well, ice and water and whale, except not every picture contains ice, water, or whale. Well, maybe every picture contains water, but they don't all contain whales. And so we need to be thoughtful to make sure that we're only adding keywords that apply to every single image that we're importing. I can adjust, or apply rather, additional keywords later. We'll talk about that momentarily. But for now, at least I might as well spend 3 seconds to add a few keywords, or at least a couple keywords. So Alaska, maybe I'd put United States, maybe inside passage, since that's where in Alaska these were captured. But the point is, you're going to add keywords only that are sort of applying to every, not even sort of, that apply to every single picture that you're importing. People often ask, well, what about the date? Nah. I don't have the date as a keyword because I've got the date in metadata thanks to the camera, and of course I would never forget to change the clock on my camera when I cross time zone lines or when daylight savings happens, or any, hypothetically speaking. What about the seasons though? That might make sense. Sometimes. These pictures were taken in the summer. But icebergs and glaciers, not exactly summertime subjects, or at least not what comes to mind when you think about summer. So in those types of situations, I usually only even bother to add seasonal information if it really is pertinent. So like fall colors, I would put fall and autumn as keywords, for example. All right, but again, make sure at this stage during this import process that you're only adding keywords that apply to every single picture that's being imported. And then finally, we come down to destination. Wait, destination was up here. Why is it also down here? Actually, I think this is pretty clever and cool. I've specified up at the top the primary location, you might say, or the general location, the specific hard drive that I'm using to store my photos, for example. Down here below, I'm simply going to choose the Into Subfolder option, and we'll call this Alaska. And then what will be the year and month? I don't remember. Do you remember? You're the date person.
I think it was October
2010.
That sounds right to me. October 2012. So 2012-10 for October 2012. Very simple. And again, we talked about that folder structure. You can decide how you like to structure your folders. But the point is that I've specified just the primary location and then the subfolder. So why is this helpful? Well, let's review all of the amazing things that we're accomplishing in one step. I'm copying my photos from my compact flash card to my primary storage location into a subfolder based on whatever I've decided it needs to be. I'm also making a backup copy of my images to a different hard drive. I'm making sure not to import suspected duplicates. I might be building smart previews, but I'm definitely building my standard previews. I could rename all of my images upon import. I could change the appearance of the photos. I could add copyright and contact information, maybe some other metadata. I can add keywords. This is amazing, all these things that are happening all at once. Then you'll say, well, yes, but look how long it took you to get all of that set up. Well, but that's mostly because I talk too much. And if I wasn't explaining all about all this stuff, it could have happened very quickly. But more importantly, next time, how much work do I have to do? So before we close this dialogue, let's pretend that we move on now to our second compact flash card, still during our Alaska trip. Well, let's take a look. I'm still copying, I'm still here, no, nothing changes. Okay, I need to change the start number for the sequence number based on my file renaming. I need to change the keywords actually because those are going to disappear, so I have to type them again. That might seem like an inefficiency. Why didn't it just leave the keywords there? Well, that's because you don't want to go on to your next trip and still be applying Alaska as a keyword after you've left Alaska. So better that they disappear and you have to type them again than to have the wrong keywords assigned to images. Okay, that was two things that I have to change. Sequence number and keywords. And I import my next set of images. What happens when I go somewhere else and now I'm ready to download images from that new trip, that separate trip? All right, let's take a look. The renaming I would have to change. If I'm renaming, I would change that to something else. Maybe it's New York and reset that sequence number to 1. So we'll call that 2 things that we have to change. And keywords again, 3 things, and the subfolder that we're going to use, 4 things. So at the beginning of let's call it a new trip, in this case, I'm sort of taking advantage of just about everything, and I only need to change 4 values in this entire dialog. And then each subsequent import, I'm only changing roughly 2 things, again, depending on which specific options I'm taking advantage of. To me, that's pretty efficient. Not only is it doing a whole lot of stuff, but these settings are sticky, so next time I don't have to change very much about those import settings. So with all of those settings established, I'll go ahead and click the import button. And you'll see the images are being copied. They start to populate. In this case, what was it? Maybe like a dozen images or however many that was. Won't take very long to copy the images. And then as soon as that copy is finished, that's when the card, if it was actually a compact flash card in a card reader, that would be ejected. And then Lightroom starts to build those previews. So you can see the status up there at the top left of the interface, indicating exactly where we are in that workflow. Pretty cool. And efficient. So again, trying to take advantage of all of the various options, or as many as make sense for you personally, to maximize the efficiency of your workflow. All right, tip number 7, opt for star ratings. Obviously, this is driven by my opinion that star ratings are best. So let me explain briefly why star ratings are best. Ultimately, in my mind, I think everyone, or at least most photographers, are going to want to have some method for identifying their best or favorite photos. If you're really lucky and you only need, you're shooting an advertising project and you only need the one photo that's going to be used in the ad, that's pretty cool. Except now you have to narrow it down to just one image. Good luck with that. So we have 3 basic methods for identifying our images. You might say 4 methods. That 4th, which I think of as maybe supplementary, is you could delete your outtakes. And that certainly can thin the herd quite a bit. This is mostly kind of a psychological question, I guess you might say. Do you delete your outtakes? And some photographers say, yes, absolutely. And I say, no way. What if I need that later? So it's just a matter of personal preference. I might delete something that's just a horrible, bad exposure, whatever the case may be. But by and large, I just don't bother. I don't take the extra time to delete the outtakes. Instead, I'm just marking my favorites and then filtering so that I'm only ever looking at the favorites with the peace of mind that I can always go back and look at those outtakes if I say, oh wait, that's not in focus, or whatever the case may be. So Lightroom gives us 3 options. We have the pick flag, we have the star ratings, and we have the color label. The pick flag is essentially a yes or no decision. Well, there's the first problem for me. I'm not so good with the yes or no. I like having like maybe +1, I like having more options available to me. So I'm not really keen on the whole yes or no, pick or reject. I also don't like the idea of saying that my images are rejected. It stings a little bit. But the pick flag is a yes or no decision, and just generally speaking from an organizational standpoint, that doesn't suit me. Also, the pick flag is a Lightroom-only feature. A pick flag does not use a standard metadata field, so no other software knows about your pick flag, including Adobe Bridge. Does not know about your pick flags. You can't assign a pick flag in Adobe Bridge. You can't view a Lightroom pick flag in Adobe Bridge because it's not a metadata standard that's been established. It's a Lightroom-only feature. It is only in the catalog. We'll talk about some of the catalog issues a little bit later. So I just don't care for pick flags. In fact, I suggest to photographers who want that yes or no option, fine, but instead of pick flags, use star ratings, where a 5-star rating is a pick and a 1-star rating is a reject, or something along those lines, just so that you're using a metadata standard. So for example, you assign a star rating, any other application can potentially see that information. We'll talk about some of the nuance there. So star ratings, sort of I've addressed what I perceive as the benefits based on talking about the pick flag, is that we can stack rank our images. We can have a 1-star as a bad image and a 5-star as a great image. I'll talk more about my actual approach in just a moment. We can sort based on relative quality. And to me, that's advantageous relative to pick flags. It's also a metadata standard, so other software can potentially see it. So a number of advantages, but mostly just a way to approach your workflow, a way to think about your images. And then color labels. A couple of problems with color labels. One is that they don't really have an inherent meaning. Originally, they were thought of as a priority code. It's part of the IPTC metadata standard. And so there was that, red means really urgent and green means don't worry about it today kind of a thing. But there's no inherent meaning really for most of us. And you can still only assign a single color label. What I find a lot of photographers do is use the color label as a supplemental tool to add additional information about the photo. So for example, a red image needs to be retouched, or a yellow image needs to be printed. Except you can only assign a single color label, so what about an image that needs to be both retouched and printed? So you have to be thoughtful about how you're going to set up color labels if you want to use them. But the bottom line is that to me, it's sort of a no-brainer that star ratings just make the most sense for the reasons that I've talked about. Now, I take a little bit of an unusual approach, you might say, to using star ratings. And so let's talk about that just a little bit. When you're assigning star ratings, just naturally, intuitively, you might assume we can opt for no stars or anywhere from a 1-star to a 5-star rating. Well, we naturally tend to think that a 1-star rating is a bad rating. We try to avoid the restaurants with a 1-star rating, right? So to me, it just doesn't really make sense. Why would I add a star rating to an image to say that I don't like this image? Why not just skip it? So the approach that I take is to start off with a pass where I will only assign a 1-star rating to my keepers. And the images that I think are my rejects, essentially, I just don't assign a star rating to. So I'm going to review them all and assign those ratings as I see fit, but only 1 star or nothing. Well, why? Partly just to separate the emotion when I'm reviewing my photos. How many stars would you assign this image if we assume 1 star is bad, 5 stars is exceptional? I'll remind you that I am standing right here. 3 stars? Being generous, aren't you? Because I'm standing right here. 3 or 4, really? Who would say it's like 2 stars? See, there's some nice people up in the front who are being very generous with their star ratings for my image. Now, what might I have assigned this image in terms of star ratings? Where 1 is bad, 3's, it's okay. 4's pretty good, 5's great. Well, at the time it's happening, this is like 6 or 10 stars. Yes. The whale is slapping its tail against the water. It's so exciting. It's amazing. And I'm just capturing dozens of images of a tail in the water. Because this is one of those things, it's much cooler to see a whale slapping the surface of the water with its tail than it is to see a whale tail frozen in time. So at the time, I thought magazine cover. And then later I thought, maybe not. Maybe even delete, except I don't delete. And so the idea here is to the extent possible, separate the emotion. So I try to do one pass, just it's a yes or no. And so I'm going to be a little bit liberal. I'm going to be, kind of generous with those yeses, maybe at this stage. I mean, I don't want to give every image a 1-star rating, but this boat's kind of nice looking. I'll give that a 1-star rating. The tail's interesting. I might have better ones later. I mean, you know how this is. If anybody been on a small boat in Alaska and photographing whales, and the first time you see a whale, you're just going crazy. You have high-speed motor drive, and you're taking 60 pictures of this whale as its tail just goes broop. Then later you see a breaching whale, and it's even more pictures. And by the end of if you're fortunate enough to have a number of days out on the boat, eventually you're just like, is it breaching? No? Never mind then. So, you need to be thoughtful, especially when you're starting to go through your images. Do I think I have better later? But when in doubt, I'd give the image a 1-star rating. Oh, I kind of like those reflections. This one I could take or leave. That's just a glacier. It's a little more interesting, etc. And so I just go through the photos. It's an interesting shape. I mean, sunburst, it always got to have a star, right? More reflections, I might even like that one better than the earlier one we saw. Some interesting shapes of ice. No, I don't think so. Ooh, that I like. So just an initial pass, 1 star to images that I think I might use. And obviously for all of us, that criteria is going to vary a little bit. In my case, I tend to be pretty generous with my 1-star ratings because I do a lot of teaching and presenting and showing images, and so I might need to show images that are, here's the one that wasn't quite as good, or here's the one that I really like, that sort of thing. So for me, I might be a little generous, whereas you might be a little bit more strict. But just a simple first pass, basically a yes or no. Then I'll come back. I'll go ahead and just filter the images here based on the star rating. So I only want to see the images that have a star rating. And now I'm going to upgrade the ones that I think are really good. Conceptually, I might also downgrade some images. What if I have, for example, several images of reflections? Then I might want to pick a favorite among those. Or maybe two of them are similar, the third one is unique, so maybe I'll keep 2 out of the 3, something like that. But the point is that I might actually downgrade an image and remove a star rating. In Lightroom, by the way, these star ratings, just the numbers 1 through 5, or the number 0 to remove a star rating. You can use the arrow keys to navigate, for example. So I'll go through, and any of the images that I think I really like, I might upgrade to a 2 or a 3-star rating. So you're saying, oh, I really like this one. Better get this one on Instagram right away. Whatever the case may be. So this one I kind of like. Let's give that a 2-star rating. And we go through, and I kind of like this one. It's very kind of painterly. Let's say I really, really like it. I might give it a 3-star rating. But I won't go over 3 stars. Ideally, this second pass is not like while my heart's still racing a mile a minute because I just saw the whale tail splashing around. Ideally, this is at least a day later, ideally kind of a week later, after I've calmed down a little bit from all the excitement. Sometimes that's not possible. Maybe you're working on a deadline. You've got a lot of work to do. You need to get through this right now. But whenever possible, I try to separate the timing there. Go through once, 1 star only, and then wait a little while, come back to the images and upgrade those that I really like to a 2 or 3-star rating. 4 and 5-star ratings, I wait until after I've generally had a chance to live with the image a little bit, maybe make a print of the image, share it online, get feedback from others, enter it into a contest and see if it wins, whatever your criteria might be for helping you sort of filter out which ones are really your best images. Again, in part to sort of separate out that emotional aspect. That was a really cool experience, yeah, but photographically maybe it wasn't the best image in the world. And so I try to wait until I've had a chance to kind of work with the image, apply some adjustments, make a print, whatever the case may be, before I would consider a 4 or 5-star rating. So I try to take that deliberate approach, realizing, of course, our lives are busy. We don't always have the luxury of doing that, but that's the approach that I take in terms of identifying my favorite photos. Review early and consistently. So this obviously is just sort of an add-on to that previous tip, but I cannot stress enough how helpful this can be. At the end of the day, you're tired, and you don't want to work. You don't have to review your photos. I mean, sometimes you're really eager to review the photos, just depends. Anybody been fortunate enough to go on an African safari when they're like waking you up at 4 in the morning to get you into the vehicle so you can be out there by 5, and they don't let you go to sleep again until like late after dinner. It's after dark. It's exhausting. It's amazing, but it's exhausting. It's really important to be consistent. This Alaska trip, the photos that we were just looking at, I mentioned earlier that I'd captured over 10,000 photos on that trip. But every single night at the end, when the light is gone, we're not doing star trails from the boat, we're finished. Now I'm downloading the images, recharging my batteries, and also going through and marking my favorites. By the time I came home from that trip, all of my images had a star rating or a lack of a star rating. All the images had been reviewed. That felt so amazing. I can't say that for every trip, but I try to make that the case for every trip as much as possible. So as soon as possible, if you have a break in the middle of the day, you're not shooting in the middle of the day, download that morning's photos, go through the review process for them. At the end of the day, preferably if you're not too exhausted before you crash for the day, go through and review those photos, or try to catch up every other day, or whatever works for you. But try to make sure that you're reviewing your images, the initial review at least, as quickly as possible to perform that initial review, mostly to make sure that you don't fall behind, and use a consistent approach. I'm not suggesting that you have to use my method. I just share it because maybe you'll find it helpful. But whatever method you're using, always use that same method. Or if you're going to change, if you were using pick flags and now you've decided the star rating thing maybe is a good idea, go back into Lightroom, filter all of your images based on pick flag, and assign a star rating. Just give them all a 1-star rating, for example, or a 3-star rating, whatever makes sense based on your approach to assigning those star ratings, so that you can transition rather easily. Filter by pick flag, select all, assign a star rating. Pretty easy. All right? So just be consistent. Even if you kind of change your workflow over the course of time, then go back and try to clean up the old stuff, but just be really, really consistent with the approach that you're taking. Apply keyword. Well, some keywords. Some keywords. How helpful are keywords? They can be so amazingly helpful. How much time do you want to spend keywording your images? None. So this is a dichotomy, right? We want all of the benefit of keywords with none of the effort of keywords. So we have to strike a balance somewhere in between. This is part of the reason that I encourage you to apply at least basic keywords during that import process. They might not be terribly helpful because they apply to every single image that you're importing, but at least it's a start. But then I like to go through and assign some basic keywords, but I'm lazy, so I'm going to try to do this in the most efficient way possible. That involves being aware of one of the little caveats in Lightroom, even if I select multiple images. So let's just assume, since we were talking about these reflection images, I'm going to select multiple images. So down here on the film strip at the bottom of my Lightroom interface, you can see that I clicked on one of those reflection images, those water reflections, and then I held the Control key on Windows or the Command key on Macintosh and click on additional images. Or if they were all in a row, I could click on one and hold the Shift key and click on the last one in the series. I have multiple images selected. However, I'm in the loop view. The loop view meaning I'm looking at one big image as opposed to the grid view where I'm looking at lots of thumbnails of my images. In the loop view, no matter how many images I've selected, Lightroom thinks that I'm only working on one image. So if I were to assign that reflections keyword to those 3 selected images, no, actually only this larger image, the third of those 3 selected images, will receive the keyword. So whenever I want to work with multiple images, I'll generally switch to the grid view, select the images in the grid view even just to kind of play it safe so I don't end up accidentally being in the loop view. And then I can come over to the right panel, for example, and I'll go ahead and add some keywords to those 3 selected images. And we'll just add water, for example. Oops, not waterfall, just water, and reflection. And then I'll press Enter or Return on the keyboard to apply those keywords. And all 3 of those images now have the keyword assigned. Make those thumbnails a little bit bigger so you can see them better. And another option that you might like to take advantage of is the painter. So we could certainly select multiple images and then add keywords that apply to all of those images, then select a different set of images and add keywords to those, etc. But I find a lot of people like to make fun of the painter, mostly because it's cute, but I actually find it to be rather efficient. Number one, we can work, I think, a little bit faster when we're using the painter, but also, have you ever had a situation where you need to select lots of photos? And so you click, and then you Control or Command click on another image, and Control or Command click on another image, and then you accidentally let go of the keyboard and click in just the wrong place, and now only one photo is selected and you got to start over? I've never done that, but I've heard of other photographers who have had that. And so for me, the painter is kind of a nice way of dealing with this. If you don't have the painter on the toolbar down below the images, the preview area, you can click on this little triangle, this little pop-up over at the far right of the toolbar, and then choose Painter from there. That will cause that little painter, looks like a spray paint can, to appear. If you don't see your toolbar, by the way, the letter T will toggle the visibility of that toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and click on the painter, and then what do I want to paint onto the images? Well, I want to paint keywords, so I'm going to choose keywords from the pop-up there. You can see that we can assign star ratings with this method and a variety of other metadata values. So we'll go with keywords, and what's the first keyword that we're going to use? Well, let's make it really easy and make it water. So water will be the keyword that we're adding. We could add multiple keywords, but I usually work with just one keyword at a time unless it's really obvious. Like if I'm going to apply keywords to humpback whales, then I might make humpback, comma, whale, comma, mammal, depending on what your approach is. So using that painter, now I can click on a thumbnail to assign, in this case, the water keyword to the image. Oh, look, there's another picture that contains water. Oh, look, another. Well, looking ahead, we can see that actually every single picture that we're looking at right now contains water. Well, I can, in addition, click and drag, just like I'm spray painting, I can click and drag to paint onto a series of images, or in this case, all of the images. Let's go ahead and try that again with the keyword ice. Oops, not Iceland, just ice. And now I'm going to paint, let's see, not there, not there. There's some ice, and there's some ice, and there's some ice. And again, I could also click and drag if there were some adjacent images. I can just paint across a set of photos. So this works out pretty nicely. Then the question is, how much time am I going to spend keywording all these photos? So I'm not going to go to each individual image. I'll switch here to the loop view, for example. I'm not going to go to every single photo and say, okay, boat, water, lights, fishing, commercial, every possible keyword I can think of. I'm going to try to do this in groups, either by selecting multiple images or by using that painter. But how much time do I really want to spend adding keywords? Not very much. And so instead, I'm just going to keyword maybe my favorite photos, so maybe add keywords after I've already assigned star ratings and filter that way, or based on key subject. What's really important? Now, there's two reasons in my mind why I'm going to be using keywords. Number one is so that I can find a photo later. Where's that picture of the boat? Boat, there it is. Or later I might need to be reminded of something. What kind of whale is that? Or what's the name of that building? Or whatever the case may be. And so based on that, I'll think about what's the most important information that I might be searching for or that I might want to be reminded of. We had the photos of Paris earlier, for example. And so that structure, I don't think I'm ever going to forget the name of. But this structure in the foreground, I don't remember the name of. I just know that it was one of the two main shopping department stores, whatever. And that wasn't really my thing in Paris. So there's some information that you're going to, do I really need to add Eiffel Tower as a keyword to these images? Well, I don't know, am I ever going to be looking specifically for a photo of Eiffel Tower? Probably. So that might meet that first criteria. Do I need to be reminded of the name? I sure hope not. But there are other examples. The Arc de Triomphe, okay, that one you're going to remember. What's the building with all the plumbing on the outside of it? See? The Pompidou. The Pompidou building. So mostly it's a matter of finding images, filtering images, but also reminding yourself. So I try to sort of think, what do I really care about? What's really most important? I don't need to know that a whale is a mammal in terms of keywords because I just already know that a whale is a mammal. Of course, you might work with scientific books where you need to be able to filter based on mammals and decide which mammal you're going to show. So something to give some thought to in terms of how critical a lot of keywords are versus just some. And it's always compromise because there'll always be concepts that you don't relate to. I used to manage stock photos and deal with stock agencies or deal with licensing images to companies that needed to use them for advertising. Did they ever say, we'd like a picture of a whale in Alaska? No, it'd be like, we need something that's big. Well, I didn't make big a keyword for my whale photos. So now I've got to think about it anyway. So there's always going to be those challenges when you're looking for the images. I feel like you're always going to wish you had more keywords assigned to your photos, but you're always going to wish you had spent less time actually at the computer typing those keywords. So Location data. So admittedly, this is a tip that maybe is not as important for some of you as it might be for me, depending on how much you travel and whether or not the location really matters for your pictures. Depends on what type of photography you do, and partly just based on your mindset as well. For me, though, location tends to be pretty important. It tends to be, in large part, the reason I was taking pictures in the first place. Well, Lightroom includes a map module. Now, I am using a cellular data connection, so this won't be super fast in terms of refreshing some of the information here, but we have the map module. And this is actually making use of Google Maps so that I can find my pictures on the map. But first, I have to put my pictures on the map. How might we do that? Well, actually, this picture right there, see that thumbnail or the thumbtack as it were? This picture got put on the map completely automatically because the picture was taken by a camera that includes a GPS receiver. That camera is called an iPhone or any smartphone. Most phones these days have a GPS receiver built in. So as long as you're not in airplane mode, the GPS antenna is active and it knows your location. If you're inside a building, obviously, sometimes that's tricky. Many cameras, a lot of point and shoot cameras, include GPS receivers. There's at least one, maybe a couple now, digital SLRs that include GPS receivers. There's accessories you can mount onto your hot shoe and plug into your camera that is a GPS receiver that will put the information automatically into your photos. So there are ways to take a picture and have it automatically contain location information. So this picture was taken in the same location as this picture, except this picture was taken with the iPhone and this picture was taken with a digital SLR that does not have a GPS receiver. Therefore, this image is not on the map. However, I took a reference photo. I call these location snapshots. Take the phone that has a GPS receiver or the compact camera or even your SLR, whatever camera is equipped with a GPS receiver, take a reference photo with that. Now I know this location where this picture was taken is also where I took this picture without the benefit of GPS. Let's go ahead and zoom in so we can confirm. I'm sure you could tell from the lake down below the scene there. That's the Hallstatter See. This is in the Alps in Austria, up above the town of Hallstatt. There's Hallstatt. There's the push pin on the map where this iPhone picture was taken. I can drag and drop this photo to the exact same location. I'll go ahead and enable that GPS reverse lookup, and my photo's been added to the map. So now I can find this photo on the map, even though GPS information was not added at the time of capture. Now you can see over on the right panel, we have GPS coordinates. You can actually just copy and paste those into your web browser if you're looking at the Google Maps website, for example, and locate that image on the map. But even if I didn't take that reference photo, if I can remember where the images were taken, I took some graffiti photos, for example. They were captured in the city of Graz in southern Austria. Most people have never heard of Graz. It's actually the second largest city in all of Austria. And we're going to zoom in. These graffiti photos were taken on a little alleyway that is a part of a street called Nissenberger Gasse. And so we're going to locate Nissenberger Gasse on the map, which is right there. We'll go ahead and zoom in. Here's a little alleyway of Nissenberger Gasse. And this little spot right in there is where the pictures were actually taken. So even though I didn't take a reference photo, I remember where I was that once. Another reason to work soon after you took your picture so you don't forget. I'll go ahead and select this range of graffiti photos that were captured in this location on the map, and I will simply drag and drop the photos onto the map. So now GPS coordinates again have been added to the metadata for the photos. Oh, but it gets even better. Also, while I was in Graz, I went down Annenstrasse and I recorded a GPS track log along the way and captured a bunch of images. And the track log basically records the time and the GPS coordinates. In other words, where was I at any given moment? And the camera records the time that the picture was taken. So we have time in common. So based on the time, we can figure out where each picture was taken. So I'm going to click my track log button down at the bottom toolbar here below the map, and we will navigate to, actually I was just there, we'll navigate to the location where the track log is saved. I just use a little app for the iPhone to record a track log. There's a variety of ways. Many GPS receivers or navigators have a track log recording feature. Most smartphones, you can get an app that'll record a track log, and you just say start recording, and then when you're finished walking around or whatever you're doing, you can hit stop recording. Of course, in this case, I forgot to change the time on my iPhone, and so I need to set an offset, so a time zone offset, and I need to make this plus 6 hours because the phone was still set to New York time, but the pictures were taken in Austrian time. Go figure. So I'm going to select all the pictures on the film strip. I'm going to let Lightroom do all the hard work for me. I've loaded the track log. I corrected my time mistake that I made only that once ever. I did remember to change the clock on my phone, my digital SLR, which is amazing. And now I'm going to go back to that track log pop-up menu, and I'm going to choose to auto tag the selected photos on the film strip, and shazam. All of the photos are plotted onto the map. So here's some pictures of love locks over the river Mur. There is, we'll go ahead and take a look at this picture here. There's a picture taken, there's a bridge here in the rail car, and you can see the clock tower, the bell tower of a church here with a little copper sort of onion-shaped thing up at the top. Well, if we go right back to the map and zoom in on that area, let's make sure I'm being truthful here. Did it really work, or does it just look like it worked? Well, if I switch from the road map to the satellite view, there's the bridge, here's a little onion copper top on the bell tower of the church, etc. So pretty cool. And now I can go find my images on the map, which is actually kind of cool in and of itself. But I find for a couple reasons. Sometimes I want to know where a picture was taken so I can go back there and find that subject again. In other situations, I actually use the map as a tool for locating images. I can't decide what image I want to put on the cover of the magazine, or what image I want to print, or what image I want for whatever project I might be working on. So let's just browse the map, and in this case I'm looking at Austria photos, and so it's not a very populated map, but I can go through the map and see where I have push pins, and when I click on a push pin, I'll see a little pop-up here with a thumbnail that shows me the images that were captured at that location. And so I can sort of refresh my memory based on the location where the images were captured. So just kind of meander around the map, and oh yeah, Slovakia, there was that great blue church in Bratislava, Slovakia. That might be a cool image, or whatever else. So I use it mostly as a memory aid to remind myself of certain pictures, like thinking about oh yeah, the Pyrenees, that was really cool, and Rome's always great, whatever the case may be. I'll navigate around that map looking for photos that I might want to use for whatever purpose I may have in mind. So again, sort of like we talked about with keywords, where there's that dual purpose, same thing with this location information. I use it both to remind myself of where that picture was taken, but also so that I can essentially find images based on location. There's a whole bunch more that we could do there with that location, but we'll move on to some other cool little tips here. So number 11, clean up with stacks. So let's get back into the library module here in Lightroom, and as our example, we have some coin photos here. So I've got a series of pictures captured very, very close to the coins, and so very, very narrow depth of field, and so I created a focus stack. So I captured the images using only a change in focus. So I start with the focus set to the very beginning, the very front of the frame, then move the focus back a little, and back a little, and back a little, and back a little, making sure to overlap. And then the final result is that image there. In this case, assembled with Helicon Focus. Great tool, produces great results. You can assemble the same basic result in Photoshop. It doesn't do quite as good, but it does reasonably good. And one of the advantages in Photoshop is then you have all of the layer masks. So you could go back in there and fine tune by hand. But frankly, if you're going to do a lot of focus stacking, I think Helicon Focus is a great tool to use for that. The thing is, I had a total of 17 images in order to assemble that composite into the final result, which means now I have 18 images representing the final result, the 17 that I initially captured plus the final result. I don't really need all that. So maybe I should just delete the others. Well, first, you know by now that that's not my thing, but also, who's to say that you might not want that photo, for example, where we have, just the euro cent over on the left is in focus, and then we've got narrow depth of field. You might like that. So I don't want to get rid of all these pictures, but I don't want to see them all the time, and that's where stacks come into play. The first thing I'm going to do is select the image that I want to represent the stack, in theory. I'm going to do it wrong, so that I can show you how we'll change it after the fact. I'm going to go select, in fact, this image. And then I'll select the rest of the images. In this case, I'm fortunate enough that I don't have to worry about any other photos because this folder only contains this one set of photos. So I'm just going to choose Select All. But you could also click on the first image and then shift-click on the last image, for example. But the key image right now is not the image I really want to represent the stack. But we'll fix that in just a moment. So with all of those images selected, I'll right-click and then choose Stacking, followed by Group into Stack. Pretty simple, and now I have just one picture. How cool is that? Well, really, I don't have one picture. You can see the little icon there at the top left, a little badge, indicating that there are actually 18 pictures contained in the stack. Want to see them all? Just click on that little badge, and the list expands. And then we can navigate among them, and actually, I think this image represents a better option, a better representation of the stack. So I can choose that image as the image that will represent the stack, essentially. So I've got to select all these. And so I can set this as the image for my stack. Where'd my option go? Move to top of stack. There we go. And so now the stack is represented by that final image, by the real image, you might say. So I've got 18 images, and it looks like just a single image, but at any time I can expand the stack or collapse the stack just by clicking on that badge. You can also right-click and go to stacking, and you'll find options for expanding versus collapsing the stack depending on the current state. You can actually collapse or expand all stacks currently on the film strip if you have lots of images that have been stacked together. We can unstack, unstack if we decide later, oh, I don't need these photos to be stacked anymore for whatever reason. So a cool way to just consolidate. So if you're creating HDR images, composite panoramas, composite depth of field, as is in the case here, there's all sorts of scenarios where you might want to essentially just compress those. Or even, you take pictures of people, and this is the best one. I don't want to get rid of these others, but this is my favorite. Let's compress them into a stack just to make my work a little bit easier. Employ collections. I actually don't tend to use collections all that much. I usually use collections for a temporary purpose, and then I'll use a keyword to sort of make that collection permanent, you might say, because keywords are a metadata standard, collections are not. So let's take a look at collections. For what purpose might we create a collection? I don't know either. For a calendar? No? A book? A contest that you're going to enter?
Portfolio?
A what?
Portfolio?
Portfolio. My best images. So let's take a look at how we can create a collection. Why would we create a collection? Well, because we have sort of disparate images or a specific project. So for example, we might create a collection for a calendar, and we might pull from all sorts of different folders. So collections sort of behave like a folder, except that it's not where your image actually exists. It's just sort of a virtual folder. So my whale photos are in the Alaska folder, but I might use one of those whale photos in my calendar project, for example. And I'm going to take a fall colors shot, and I'm going to take a tulips shot, and whatever the case may be. So let's go ahead and make a collection. I'll click the plus associated with collections here on the left panel in the library module and choose Create Collection. And we'll just call this Calendar 2015, or maybe I want something more specific, my whales calendar, whatever the case may be. I'm going to turn off the checkbox to include selected photos just because I haven't yet decided which images belong in this collection. But if I made a selection of photos first, I can have them automatically added to the collection as part of this process. I can set the collection as the target collection. This is pretty huge. You might be familiar with the quick collection. This is just sort of a temporary working collection when you just need to quickly sort through some photos. You can press the letter B on the keyboard, as in B on the keyboard, to add an image to the quick collection. But we can actually change which collection is the target of that letter B keyword. I'm going to do that here. I'll go ahead and turn on that checkbox. And then do I want to sync it with Lightroom Mobile? In this case, no, mostly because we haven't even looked at Lightroom Mobile yet. So I'll go ahead and click Create. That new collection is created. Calendar 2015. See that little plus symbol to the right of the collection name? That indicates that this collection is the target collection. So the letter B keyboard shortcut applies. We'll add an image to this collection. So let's just go ahead and go to all photographs since we don't have all that many pictures. And you got to have a horse picture in your calendar. So I'll select that horse picture, letter B. And we need something, oh yeah, the Eiffel Tower, except it's vertical. We have to have a horizontal for the calendar. Letter B. Or you print the whole calendar vertical. Or you be a rebel and you just don't worry about the white space. Oh, the Arc de Triomphe, yes, letter B, adds it to that collection. And oh, an old rail car in San Francisco, sure, why not? And you know, it's a whale tail, of course. And how about the reflections that I liked? That one there, letter B. The yarn from Austria. GPS tagged with location information. So if you want to go there and photograph the yarn, I can give you the GPS coordinates. The donuts, that's very tempting. Graffiti, maybe this graffiti shot. We'll go ahead and add that. You know, some flowers in Central Park, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. I'm just adding images to that calendar collection, ultimately making sure I have at least 12 in the collection. But again, this could be for any purpose, and these images could be taken from all sorts of different folders, and then I can work with them. Then generally I would add some sort of keyword to the images, so like, you know, calendar 2015 as a keyword, so that I can always find those images later. Because as we'll talk about a little bit later, collections are only inside of Lightroom, and so no other application knows about them, essentially. We can also have smart collections. So I'll go ahead and create a smart collection. I'll go to the plus symbol here once again and choose Create Smart Collection. And I want to create a collection called Best Photos. It's going to be in my Smart Collection set. And best photos are defined as, since we haven't done a whole lot of star rating yet, 1 star or better. Eventually this will probably be like 4 stars and better, that sort of thing. But in the case of this catalog, we don't have that many images yet. So we'll just say my best is defined as a rating of 1 star or greater. I could add additional criteria, so it's, you know, my best whale photos, 1 star or better, and it's got the word whale in keywords. For now, we'll just leave that as it is. What that means is that this essentially is a search result. So best photos is a photo that contains a 1 star or greater rating. When I say, you know, this horse I don't like as much as that other horse, so I'm going to give it a 0 star rating, it disappears instantly. Or if I go and find an image that does not have a star rating, so let's go do that. Let's go find an Alaska photo. This one does not have a star rating, but I'm going to add a 1 star rating to it. Now when I get over here to best photos, there's that image. So it's sort of like a live search result, which can work out very nicely. It can also be confusing when images, you know, enter into the collection or disappear from the collection when you're not really expecting it. So think of that as really more of a saved search result. But the collections themselves, the standard collections, the not smart collections, are really just essentially a virtual folder. So they can be very helpful in terms of organizing photos in a way that goes beyond that folder structure. And some photographers use collections more than they use the folders. They're always working on projects, or they think about their photos in ways other than how they're organized on the hard drive, or whatever the case may be. I tend to use collections just for special projects, and so I don't tend to have too many collections going on at any given time. Leverage mobile. You guys have heard about Lightroom Mobile?
Yeah.
So currently available for the iPad as well as the iPhone. I'm sure we'll see an Android version at some point in the not too distant future. First, we'll start off not mobile. meaning that we'll work in the desktop version of Lightroom. And what we need to do is make sure that we have synchronization turned on and that we've signed in to our Creative Cloud account. The Lightroom mobile app is actually free. You just need to have a Creative Cloud account in order to be able to make use of it, to synchronize your images. And so I'm signed in already. You can see that synchronization is turned on, so that part's already taken care of. The way Lightroom Mobile works is it only allows you to see images on the mobile device that are included in synchronized collections on the desktop. Not folders, but collections. So yet another reason to use some collections. You could actually create a collection from an entire trip. So let's say, for example, I want the Prague folder, the entire folder, to be synchronized to Lightroom Mobile. I can first make a collection by simply dragging that folder down into the collections section. Now I have a collection of all those images. Easy breezy. But then I also need to tell Lightroom to please synchronize the images to Lightroom Mobile, because I need to be able to see them on Lightroom Mobile, and there's a process involved. The images go from Lightroom on the desktop up to the Creative Cloud and then down to my mobile device. And so I'm going to make use of Lightroom for that purpose. I need to tell it which collections I want to synchronize. And so you might be able to tell, it's a very small icon to the left of the Austria collection here. There is a little, kind of looks like a lightning bolt almost. It's a synchronization icon. It indicates that that collection is currently enabled for synchronization. Below it, my Calendar 2015 and my Prague collection, those two just have a little empty box, kind of like a checkbox without the check in it. And so those collections are not enabled for synchronization. But I already do have the Austria collection enabled for synchronization. And it's already synchronized, because I did that in advance, because I'm using a cellular data connection that's not especially fast. So you have to bear with the slight slowness here. And the lack of having, there it goes, of having refreshed. So we launched the Lightroom mobile app. Here we go. Now you were hoping to get a closer look at the yarn photo, I know. Thankfully, it's in the collection that has already been synchronized via Lightroom Mobile. So at the moment, I have just the one collection enabled for synchronization. If I switch back, I'm going to go ahead and tell it that we want to synchronize the Prague collection as well. So I'll click that little checkbox, and you'll see that little synchronization icon. Up at the top, at the identity plate, you can see syncing 10 photos. That will take some time. I mentioned the cellular data connection, right? So we're going to go back over here to Lightroom Mobile, and you'll see in the meantime, the Prague collection has been added, but the photos haven't yet made it. So my computer is still working on sending the images up to the Creative Cloud and then down to my iPad. This will take a little bit of time. I'll go ahead, though, and in the meantime, tap on the collection for the Austria photos, and we get what is essentially a grid view, so that we can view thumbnails of all of our images. And yes, I know you were hoping you would have the opportunity to see this image a little more closely. If I tap on an individual image, I can see just that image. I can swipe across. Okay, I'll tell you, as long as we're going to see this photo, I actually thought this was a real bird when I approached it and photographed it. Turns out it's a decoy. And I was fooled, which means I'm dumber than most birds. It was a really good decoy. So here are those photos that we had already seen some of within the desktop version of Lightroom. You can see in some cases the preview had not yet built yet, and so I'm waiting for some of these images to download, etc. Pretty cool. I can also perform some basic adjustments. So let's go ahead and we'll go back to one of the other graffiti photos here. That one. So an interesting photo. I can also apply some basic adjustments. So I'll go ahead and tap, for example, and you'll see that I've got a set of adjustments available. I also have a set of presets. So if I want a black and white effect, I could, for example, just choose one of the built-in Lightroom presets. But let's just go to the set of adjustments. I can scroll across to see all the various adjustments that are available. Maybe I'll go to saturation and make it, oh wait, not more saturated. Maybe less saturated, maybe we'll crank up the clarity. Really all I'm doing is making a more obviously edited version of this photo. And then I'll go ahead and switch back to Lightroom here. Let's select that image. I mentioned the slow cellular data connection, right? It's going to take some time, but hopefully sometime while I'm talking to you, that process will complete. I've got to first finish the synchronization. So I'm actually going to turn off the synchronization of that prog collection just in hopes that my adjustment will synchronize a little bit more quickly. But you can see that we can perform some basic adjustments, literally basic, only the basic set of adjustments that you find in the Develop module in Lightroom. And obviously, we don't have as much flexibility as we might like in terms of adjustments. We also don't have as much flexibility as you might like in terms of applying adjustments, or I'm sorry, in terms of applying metadata. We can assign pick flags if that's your preference, or you can assign star ratings if you prefer that approach, but we're not able to assign keywords or other metadata, for example. But I can assign a star rating. You can see at the bottom left, you might be able to tell right there that this image has a 1-star rating. To assign a rating, I can just tap on the image and drag upward to increase the number of stars or downward to decrease the number of stars. So there's 1-star, 5-star, etc., or all the way down, and we've got a 0-star rating, for example. I'll just set that up to maybe a 2-star rating at this point. So we're able to assign star ratings or pick flags, but not keywords and other metadata. We're able to perform some basic adjustments, but not the more advanced adjustments. And we're also able to share the images. We can email the image or post it to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, all these different options that are available for sharing via our mobile devices. So what does that translate into in terms of workflow? And why might you want to make use of Lightroom Mobile? Number one, it's a great platform for sharing your images because now you can have your images automatically synchronized so that you can share those photos with others in a very easy way using, for example, a tablet. You can also assign those star ratings. You can perform that basic triage, that basic review of photos in either a much more relaxed environment, so kick your feet up on the couch and just enjoy working with your photos in a more relaxed way, or in a situation where you don't have a lot of space. Has anybody taken a commercial flight in the last few years and brought a laptop with them? Not the most fun experience unless you're sitting in first class. And so in a lot of ways, I think that mobile platform is most useful in terms of being able to actually work in a cramped environment and still get some work done. So, of course, a lot of people say, well, but I don't have keywords and I can't really apply all these sophisticated adjustments. That's true. But Lightroom for the desktop is at version 5 point whatever number we're at right now, 5.6 I think it is. And Lightroom Mobile is at, I think it's like 1.2 right now, give or take. We're just getting started with the possibilities for Lightroom Mobile. And already, initially, the first release of Lightroom Mobile did not include star ratings. It just had pick flags, so they've already added star ratings, and I'm confident that we'll see a lot of updates in a relatively short amount of time. So a pretty cool capability, especially as things progress, as the software, as Lightroom Mobile gets a little bit more feature rich. I think it will become all the more valuable as a platform for working with your images. Number 14, safeguard your metadata. So I made a couple of references to the capabilities within Lightroom in terms of using the catalog, some of the features. So for example, we talked about the pick flag being a Lightroom only feature that only lives inside the catalog. So then the question is, are you going to take an approach where you avoid features that depend upon the catalog, or do you just want to make sure to back up your catalog carefully? The approach I take is to generally not depend upon the catalog, at least to the extent that is reasonable for my workflow. And instead, or just as an additional backup, I will write my metadata out to the images themselves. So I'm going to go to the Lightroom menu on the Macintosh version of Lightroom, or the Edit menu on the Windows version, and I'm going to choose Catalog Settings. That will bring up the Catalog Settings dialog, and from the Metadata section, I'm going to turn on the Automatically Write Changes into XMP. What this means is that most, but not all, most metadata will be written out to the XMP sidecar files for your raw captures, or inside the DNG files if you've used DNG, or inside the TIFF or the JPEG images if you have some derivative images you created. So this checkbox is not entirely inclusive of all that's going to happen when you turn on this checkbox. But now Lightroom will write all of your metadata updates that are metadata standard information out to the actual images in real time. So why would this be off by default? Well, if you select 10,000 images and add some keywords to all of those images, now Lightroom needs to update a single keyword for 10,000 XMP sidecar files. There's a lot of work to be done there. And so that could slow down performance. Personally, I'll take the slower performance, instead having the peace of mind, knowing that my images are being updated essentially as far as that metadata in real time. If you don't like it that way, you can also select all of the images and then go to the metadata menu and choose Save Metadata to File. But I'd rather have the peace of mind of knowing that it's happening in real time, so that most of my metadata is now going out to both the XMP sidecar files, for example, for my raw captures, as well as to the Lightroom catalog. But that doesn't include everything. Virtual copies are Lightroom specific. There's no way to put those into an XMP sidecar file. Collections are Lightroom specific. That does not go into the XMP sidecar file. What else is on that list? Virtual copies, I mentioned. Collections, pick flags, we mentioned earlier. Smart previews are sort of an odd one. Those are just previews, so but they would not go into that XMP sidecar file. History does not go into the XMP sidecar file. What you did actually applies, but the list of steps you took with the image will not be included. So not everything goes out to that XMP sidecar file, but the most important stuff does. If you're making use of features in Lightroom that depend upon the catalog, then it behooves you to make sure that you're backing up the catalog on a regular basis. So let's take a look at the options there. On the General tab of that Catalog Settings dialog, once again, we can back up the catalog. By default, Lightroom backs up once a week. You could back up never, which seems a little silly, except you don't need to use Lightroom to back up your catalog. You can use another backup solution. Time Machine, for example, on the Macintosh will back up everything on your computer, and so if your catalog is there, that's one approach you might take. So the point is that you want to back up the catalog. You don't necessarily need to use Lightroom for that purpose, but it's not such a bad option. I would say once a month maybe is not very often, but maybe you're not using Lightroom all that often, it might be okay. You can say once a day, every time Lightroom exits, or the next time Lightroom exits. And what that really means is, normally I want you to back up once a week, but right now I want you to back up now. When you then launch Lightroom once again, the setting will be back to the original setting. So I usually leave this set to once a week. I'm already backing up the catalog via Time Machine, for example, and I'm sending my metadata out to the XMP sidecar files, so I don't feel that I have to worry too much about the catalog, and I think weekly probably works okay based on my workflow. But let's say I wanted to back up right now. I'll go ahead and choose the When Lightroom Next Exits option. I'll close that dialog, and then I'll quit Lightroom, and it will prompt me to back up the catalog. So I can also test the integrity, which I do recommend. Make sure the catalog is in good health, as it were, before you actually back it up. Optimize the catalog after backing up. Takes a little bit of extra time, but can help improve performance. You can also specify exactly where you want the backup to be saved. In this case, I'll go ahead and just click the backup button to get that started. And you'll see, obviously in this case, a tiny little catalog, and so it's not like it's going to take very much time to back it up. But the catalog itself, even if you have lots and lots of images, doesn't consume lots and lots of space because there's not that much information in the catalog. The actual previews consume a fair amount of space, but the catalog itself is not that huge. So either back it up or back up your metadata, or both, then back it up again, then keep one of your backups at an off-site location, then back it up again. Catching the theme? But keep in mind, when you back up your Lightroom catalog, you are not backing up your photos, so it is critical to also back up your photos. There's a bunch of different ways that you can approach this. I have an opinion. Surprise, surprise, surprise. I have an opinion about that backup solution. What I don't like is the notion of backing up in a way where I can't really make use of the information without performing a restore process. Okay, I'm not going to show you the software apparently. I don't want to have to go through a restore process. when something fails, when a hard drive fails, and I need to recover from a backup, I'm not going to be in the best mood. And so I'm not really interested in doing a restore, in rebuilding my data. I just want to unplug the failed hard drive, plug in the backup hard drive, and continue on my merry way. Of course, then getting another hard drive and making another backup, etc. And so what I use for backing up is synchronization software. I happen to use a product called GoodSync. It's available for both Mac and Windows. And essentially, you just define a job. I want to back up from my Photos drive to my backup Photos drive. And so it will analyze. You basically just say, OK, they're both connected. Now analyze and synchronize. Figure out what's changed on the original drive and duplicate those changes to the backup drive. This way I have an exact copy. It's sort of like RAID, for those of you that are familiar with RAID mirroring, except the thing I don't like about RAID is that it's doing it in real time. That part's great, except they're backing up to two devices that are sitting in the same box right next to each other. So if there's some really big problem that affects that box, I just lost my backup and my originals all at once. And so this is sort of, to me, a little bit more controlled approach. Now then you run the risk of forgetting to back up for 6 months. So they both have their caveats. The point being, though, is that you need to back up your photos separate of your Lightroom catalog. So don't think that backing up the Lightroom catalog via Lightroom is going to back up your photos. It's not. You'll still have to back up those photos separately. All right, there is a way. You could export as a catalog to make a copy of your catalog. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the session. You could copy your catalog and your photos all in one big fell swoop. With 4 terabytes of photos, that takes a long time. So the synchronization solves for that very long time that might otherwise be required to back up those photos, because it's only backing up what changed since the last time that I performed that backup, and it's doing that very efficiently and without me having to worry about it too much. So it takes very little time, but now I have an exact copy of that master drive. So to me, that synchronization is really the best solution going as far as backing up. Thank you very much, you guys. I'm happy to stick around and answer some questions.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.